All right. Well, welcome everybody to our regular series, our supporter call. Thank you so much for taking the time. We're excited about our special guest tonight. My name is Marcus Schweitzer. I'm the executive director of our Win the Era effort. We've had it's been an interesting, crazy few weeks, but having these regular calls and being able to engage with our 22 endorsed candidates has always been an exciting moment. Our guest tonight, actually, I've had the pleasure of working for a bit in 2018, so this is an extra special evening. But without further ado on that, I'll kick it over to Mayor Pete to talk about our special guest.
Fantastic. Well, thanks, Marcus, for the work that you're doing, and to everybody on the Win the Era team. Thanks to everybody joining this evening. In such a challenging time, one of the highlights, certainly for me, of the week, and something that really boosts my level of enthusiasm and optimism is to see how much energy there is in this community of supporters. And I know we continue to face enormous challenges as a country. The country continues to be in anguish over the systemic racism and police violence that not only led to the murder of George Floyd and the killing of Breonna Taylor, but also reminds us of all of the different ways that our country needs to change in order to be one where it is beyond question that Black lives are valued equally here. We also had something that I think was hard as an American to see in Congresswoman McBath's home state of Georgia, where people waited for hours in line to exercise their democratic right to vote in a fashion that clearly disproportionately disenfranchised Black and brown voters. And as somebody who served this country partly in the faith and knowledge that ours is the most consequential democracy of the last 2,000 years in the world, it is so painful to see the consequences of those who are not committed to ensuring that there are effective, efficient, free, fair elections in every part of the United States. But for all of these challenges, there are a lot of signs of hope too. And a lot of the hope is coming from the work that fantastic leaders are doing in the US Congress. As you know, I have often spoken to and channeled the frustration so many of us feel with Washington not being able to rise to meet the challenges that we face. But there are some good things going on there too, especially when it comes to the US House. Every issue that we've faced, from responding to the pandemic, to dealing with the scourge of gun violence, to ensuring that our democracy becomes more democratic, the House has acted on. Unfortunately, Mitch McConnell's Senate has gotten in the way. And of course, we have a president who not only is failing to lead, but providing the opposite of leadership. That's why we got to make sure that we succeed up and down the ballot in November. And it's also why we've got to make sure that we hold and expand that House majority. Lucy McBath is an extraordinary leader, somebody who has turned horrible personal tragedy in the face of gun violence into a motivation to make sure she is standing to protect the lives of others. Somebody who has turned the adversity of her experience with cancer into powerful motivation to make sure that every American has health care. And somebody in a district, the so-called swing district, who has found a way to bring people together, not just based on the partisan tribe that they belong to, but a desire to make sure that the life of this country gets better, has drawn people across the aisle. And this is exactly what expanding our majority looks like. So much so that she's attracted the attention of none other than the President of the United States, who I found just this afternoon tweeted his support for her opponent, who, needless to say, is not going to deliver the kind of leadership that we are so thankful to have with Lucy McBath. And so that's one of the reasons why, as we were identifying the candidates that Win the Era was going to endorse, I was so proud to announce that she is among those we're supporting. Now it's up to us as a community of supporters to make good on that, to make sure that we deliver and put some force behind that statement that we want to do everything we can to make sure that she returns to the U.S. House and to send more allies to her side. By the end of this conversation, if you don't already know about her leadership, I think you're going to see why I'm a fan, and I hope feel motivated to support in many ways. So with that, without further ado, Congresswoman Lucy McBath, thanks for joining us tonight. Thanks for our leadership. Please tell us what's going on the ground, how it's looking for your race, and what's affecting the people that you serve.
Well, thank you, Mayor Pete. Thank you so much. And I just want to say thank you for your phenomenal leadership. I've watched you from the very beginning, and I'm just completely amazed with all the galvanizing of support that you were able to get all around the country and really move people and stimulate people to really be engaged in our political process. And I really want to thank you for that. And I'm just, in a little short joke, I hope to be like you one day when I grow up politically. So anyway, but I am Congresswoman Lucy McBath. I represent Georgia's 6th Congressional District. I am the first Democrat to hold this seat since 1979, but most importantly, I'm the first minority in the history of Georgia to actually hold the seat. It was a seat that was once held by Newt Gingrich and my predecessor, Karen Handel, the woman who tried to defund Planned Parenthood. But I am, as I have always said, someone that I never imagined that I would be in Congress. Even though now that I look back upon my past, and the past experiences that I've had in my life and the family that I come from, it probably is really in my DNA. And I believe I'm really excited and I am where I'm supposed to be right now for a time such as this. But I was born in Joliet and raised in both Joliet and Chicago, Illinois. I am a transplanted peach here in Georgia. I was raised by healthcare providers. My father was a dentist. My mother was a registered nurse. And by day, my father was a dentist, but at night, he was a civil rights leader and movement maker in Illinois. He was Illinois branch president of the NAACP, served on the executive board for over 20 years. I was the child in the stroller at the March on Washington. I spent a lot of time with my father and my parents in Illinois as we were in all the marches and the rallies and really building the coalitions of minority communities to really stand up for their civil and human rights. I have pictures of my father at the signing of the Civil Rights Act of 1965, sitting, not 65, yeah, 1965, sitting right next to President Lyndon Baines Johnson. So I grew up very politically aware and astute about what was happening in the country. I went off to college, Virginia State University, majored in political science. And then I became a flight attendant for Delta Airlines. My love for travel and expanding my vision about different cultures and ethnicities in the world, I really was just very intrigued by traveling and getting to know the world that I, was not exposed to. And so that has had a lot to do with even the shaping of my vision about my community and the world around me. But I became a flight attendant for Delta Airlines, thought I would retire. I flew for them for 30 years. I said, well, I'll give it, 7, 8 more years. I was going to retire. I actually turned 60 on Monday. And I joke and I say, well, when I should be getting ready to retire, I'm starting my 3rd career, but probably the most important, some of the most important work I will ever do in my life. I was going to retire from Delta Airlines. The most important job I believe that I had while I was flying was raising my son Jordan Davis. That was the most important job. And people say you're Congresswoman Lucy McBath, but I say the most important title I will ever hold is being the mother of Jordan Davis, Jordan Davis's mother. And I really believe that is what led me to Washington. My son, Jordan Davis, was shot and killed in what the country has called the National Loud Music Killing in November 2012, simply playing loud music in his car with his friends in Jacksonville, Florida. He was shot and killed by a man who racially profiled the boys, called them gangbangers and thugs, shot 10 rounds into the car, simply drove away. We're one of the only national cases in the country when there's a white male shooter on black males and there are actually convictions. We did receive convictions after 2.5 years of trial. Convictions of Michael Dunn. He is now in prison, serving prison for life with no parole for the first-degree murder of my son, but also an additional 90 years, 30 years for each of the attempted murders on the other boys in the car with Jordan, plus an additional 15 years for shooting what they say is a missile in an open public space. But that is not normally what happens in the country. I think we all know, the disparities, the racial disparities that young men and boys of color are facing all around America and frankly around the world. But we found ourselves to be in a situation where we believe we were highly blessed, very, very favored, that we actually did receive some justice. But I recognized very quickly that justice was not served when there were young men all around the country, young people all around the country, people all in every community in America that were still being gunned down due to racial disparities, bigotry, discrimination, and because of the extremist gun culture that we live in. I became the national spokesperson and faith and outreach leader for Every Town for Gun Safety because I wanted to be able to change the culture that we live in. I didn't want anyone else to ever suffer what my family and I have suffered. But it was after the Parkland tragedy when I saw that those children, they were same age as my son Jordan, they were gunned down, but they were battling for their lives and no one was standing up to protect or to support them. I decided to throw my hat in the ring and run for Congress. I had never run for office before. I had never spoken, given remarks before. The largest crowds I'd ever spoken to were 200 or 300 people on board an aircraft in a silver tube. But I decided that I'd had enough and that I was afraid that our legislators in Washington and our country was not really paying heed to saving people's lives, and that this culture that we're living in, this expansive gun culture, would continue to take more and more lives if we did not act. So I threw my hat in the ring, I ran, I told my story, but I'm also a 2-time breast cancer survivor, very concerned about making sure that people like me that have pre-existing conditions have the resources and have the health care they deserve, and that they're also able to pay for that treatment and also able to make sure that they can pay for their prescription drugs. In my district alone, I have over 100,000 people that have pre-existing conditions, and about 45,000 of them are children under the age of 17. And so the Affordable Care Act is a good, viable means for people to have what they deserve to stay healthy. Yes, it has its problems, but that's why I want to be there in Washington too, to fill in the gaps and to fix what's broken and to make sure issue candidate. I've been harassed. The Republican Party has harassed my mother-in-law, the NRA president, who's the new NRA president, who is now my constituent. She is now, and she's from my city, and that's meant to intimidate me. That's meant to make me be afraid. She actually had the nerve to say that the only reason why I was ever elected is because I was a woman of color. But I honestly don't think that Marietta, Georgia, and this 6th congressional district woke up one day and said, gee, we're going to nominate and elect a Black woman to represent us. My district is an R+8 district, and 60% of the people that live in my district are very well off and very wealthy white Republicans. So I don't think, that they intended on electing me, but I think I spoke to the conscience and to the heart of what's important to them. And yes, I am a minority woman. As I said, I'm the first minority in the history of Georgia to ever hold this seat. But I'm undeterred. I'm not afraid. They say that I've, my son died by a drug deal gone bad. These are the kinds of things that they say about me. It's very racially motivated. But I stand up every day and I fight back because I know it really, really matters for the people that I represent every day.
Well, the Congress and the district and the country are so lucky that you did, that you were motivated by the loss of Jordan's life to step forward and save other lives. And bringing what you do to so many issues that I know you and your colleagues are working on is just a real gift and service in its best sense. And one of the reasons I'm so proud, and our community is so proud to support you. We had a bunch of questions come in. If that's all right, I'll do my best to be concise so that we can get to a lot of them. But I might take the liberty of peppering a question or two of my own in. But let me start. Olga in Arizona, I'll just read it exactly as she wrote it. It's a touching question. She says, as a mother of the movement, I can only imagine how painful these last few weeks have been. What do you think is the best path forward?
Thank you, Olga, for that question. You know, absolutely, these past few weeks have been exceptionally hard. Even as I sat in Judiciary yesterday, I sit on the Judiciary Committee and Ed and Labor, and we had our very first hearing. We had the brother of George Floyd come and testify before us yesterday, because we have legislation that we're putting forth as a caucus to really try to mitigate and change the culture of unlawful policing. And as I expressed to him yesterday that, you know, I said to him, you know, colleague after colleague came before him and we said, we can't even imagine what you're going through. We can't even imagine what you feel. And I spoke very candidly and I said, I've heard that all day, but I know what you feel. I have experienced that. I know that pain in your face. I know, you know, what you feel right now because I have been there. I have experienced the very same pain. And, you know, it's been very, very difficult. Every time there's a young Black male, every time there's a young man of color that is gunned down in the street, gunned down either by unlawful policing or gunned down just by within their own community or gunned down by, you know, a white American. It is a sucker punch for me in my gut and in my soul each and every single time, because one, it brings back, you know, Jordan for me, but also that this continues to happen again and again and again and again. And I think that for the first time now, we have the eyes and the ears of the nation that are really, really paying attention to the economic disparities that really COVID-19 have really brought to the forefront, but also these disparities that communities of color, that men of color suffer by every single day. And I think for the first time, people are really beginning to recognize what's happening around the country, not just within communities of color, but each and every day, young people, young Black men, people of color are under assault. And the specific climate that we're living in, the rhetoric that's coming from this administration, that's coming from our executive branch, just continues to fuel these, you know, discriminatory behaviors and the implicit bias and the racism. And so I think for the first time now, people are really willing to listen. And they're willing, I hope, to go beyond the marches and the rallies in the street. I have to honestly say, for the first time in my life, and I am 60, I just turned 60 on Monday, but for the first time in my life have I ever seen just so much of a mosaic of people from all over this nation that are coming together, collaborating together to say that Black lives really do matter. Yes, all lives matter, but Black lives have to matter. We are here. We have been intrinsically woven into the fabric of this nation. And we've been suffering these disparities for 400 years. And for the first time now, people are listening and people are standing with us. And I really hope and believe that people will really be willing to jump in to help resolve and solve the problems that communities of color have been living with for generations. And so it takes people having those hard discussions, not only with people that agree with them, but I am charging my own self and my own colleagues to go to my Republican colleagues and have these discussions. And that's what we all have to be willing to do. Go beyond our comfort zones and step out of the boat and speak to people in our communities to really have these discussions about how we make things better, because we're all accountable to one another. We're all responsible to one another. And that means having those discussions with people that don't always feel or think like we do. So actually, we've been able to do that in the House. I'm so excited with the work that we've been able to accomplish. And, we are working with the Senate as well. And we hope to be able to get some of our legislation signed into law to protect all Americans.
That's such a powerful expression of what's at stake here. Thank you for that. And it leads very naturally to the next question from Michael in Illinois. As you talk about moving beyond these expressions of support and all of this wonderful advocacy happening in the streets and making sure it leads to different institutional practices and different laws, I'd love to hear you expand a little more on the work that you're doing in the Judiciary Committee and in the House. Michael's question is, what legislation do you think would be the most effective and has a realistic chance of passing Congress that would reform and dramatically overhaul the way that police departments operate across the country?
Well, thank you, Michael, for that great question. And of course, I do sit on judiciary, and of course, a lot of what comes before us has a lot to do with racial justice, law enforcement, all of those kinds of legislation. Just what I will tell you, what we're actually working on right now is the Justice and Policing Act. And that's the very hearing that I spoke to you about that I sat in yesterday. And so what we do know is that in working in this legislation, it really is a very comprehensive piece of policy that really holds law enforcement accountable, but it also offers them resources and ways that which they might be able to expand the ways in which they police within the communities. We're trying to forge better ways for them to do community policing so that they are friends to the communities in which they serve. And we know that there's not going to be any one bill or no one individual piece of legislation that's going to solve the crisis to save lives in America. But, we have proposed the Justice and Policing Act of 2020 in Congress, and it's a bill that's going to protect all of our families and save American lives. And that is always should be our goal. The bill invests in the safety of our neighborhoods by creating community programs, which actually build trust with the communities and the law enforcement that serve those communities. It gives them support and just kind of a gold standard for training. Increasing the amounts of training that they get to make sure that they are prepared to serve within communities of color, and also hoping that that we'll be able to provide more funding to make sure that the law enforcement look like the communities that they serve. These are fact-based proposals, and they're going to be based upon research that's already been done. I myself, with Hakeem Jeffries and Cedric Richmond and Frederica Wilson, we have instituted a commission on a commission for Black men and boys, that we want to be able to do that research, collect that data to help substantiate the very proposals that we're putting together for better policing in these communities. And so these are fact-based policies that we're putting forth, trying to keep our families safe, keep them healthy and whole. And I'm a mother, and what I know is that there's nothing more important than making sure that our families and our communities are safe. So that's what we're doing, and I'm really excited. For the first time, I really believe that, as I said, we have the eyes and the ears of the nation, and my colleagues, and also the communities that we serve. I really believe are 100% behind us.
What's so important, the work that you're doing and the concrete action that you see can come of this. So we'll be eager to see how you and your colleagues continue to drive this to a solution. I want to take up a question that Sue in Texas is asking. She says, how do we get people to understand the manifestations of racism? No one thinks they are a racist, but they support and implement policies that are systemically racist. And this is certainly a question that's on my mind too, because I think we've been called in this moment to go beyond the bias and racism that comes from somebody who gets up in the morning and says, I'm a racist, and because I'm a racist, I'm going to go out and do racist things. And instead, structures and ways of doing things, whether it's language, actions, choices, votes, by people who, if you ask them, what do you think of racism, would they say they detest it, but are in many ways participating in or even worsening some of these patterns that lead to this kind of systemic injustice. That's why it's systemic. And so I'd love to hear your thoughts on what it will take, especially, again, knowing that you're in a district with a lot of different kinds of voices and faces and partisan pressures, and probably quite a few people who may not respond well to being asked to examine, as every American and certainly every white American is, how we are mixed up and implicated in this. What's your approach, and what do you think it'll take to help people see?
That's a really comprehensive question.
It's hard to throw all that at you, but I'm sure you've
No, that's okay. It's just that there's a lot that has to be addressed to be able to really be able to reach a person's conscience and what moral authority they believe that they have, what ethical authority they believe that they have. And that there again is just, whether it be through policy or whether it be through community-based organizations, or whether it be through social media, it's really, really, as I said before, really helping people to understand where they might be somewhat biased. Sometimes they don't even know that they're biased. They don't recognize that they have these biases. And so it's really, really creating spaces for people to have these discussions, creating spaces for people to be able to explore ways that they might be able to collaborate and come together. That's a really hard question to answer, because for each and every person, it just might be different for each and every person as to how they might be willing to address these moral and ethical problems that we have. I think the faith community has a huge role in being able to really address a lot of these concerns that we're having morally and ethically about what's happening in the country. Voter suppression, just oppression of people in general. It's a very hard discussion to have with people, but you have to be willing to, within our faith communities, I think politically, I think social and racial justice programs. Really being willing to have these hard discussions and to sit down and address this with people that don't always think, act, or feel or look like you do. And that's difficult to do, because it is actually placing the burden on people to examine their real hearts and examine their hearts, examine their biases. And that's very hard for people to do, because they don't always want to recognize that they might be complicit, that they might be part of the problem. It's very hard to get people to examine themselves and to examine where in their life they might have been propagating racism and biases unconsciously.
Yes.
So those deep discussions, you have to have those. And you cannot be, and you're not able to really understand the part you play in it unless you're really willing to examine yourself. That has to do with how you were raised, the community that you live in, the friends that you have, the organizations that you belong to, and really be willing to explore other ways in which you can be part of the solution in resolving the racial disparities that we have.
Well, I think your instincts as a bridge builder are going to be so important in that work. So thanks for that very thoughtful answer. And I love seeing the chat actually fill up with folks mentioning books that are helpful here. And I think that's important. White Fragility is one that's been mentioned that I want to mention. I've found very useful in coming to terms with some of these questions. And, frankly, it's important that on one hand, especially frankly for well-intentioned white progressives, that Black voices are amplified and heard, and at the same time that we're not getting into the business of expecting, on top of everything else that has been asked of Black leaders, that they do all the work of educating well-intentioned white folks on how to be anti-racist. And so I love that some of the folks in the community are suggesting ways that people can educate themselves and inquire and do this work too. But I think we'll all benefit from your perspective and the answers and ideas that you just put forward.
Well, thank you. And Mayor Pete, may I just say too, what you just said is so true and so vital, because I had, several of my white colleagues come and say, we feel so bad and what can we do? What do we do? And I said, Black America has been screaming at the top of its lungs for generations, telling you what we need to do, asking for your support, asking for your help, asking you to be engaged in these solutions. And I said, use your time, use your talents, use your resources, use your manpower, use what you already have access to. But take it upon yourselves to figure out ways that you can be part of the solution. We'll be with you. We're standing with you, but we need you to do this. We need you to finally take responsibility to help us, because it's apparent, Black America cannot do it by themselves. If we'd been able to do it, it would have been done a long time ago.
Right. No, that's so right. So much of the work and so much of the change has to be done by and among those who have been on the benefiting side of these privileges, but our whole country will be better off when we get to that work. I know we're drawing close to the end of the time. There are so many great questions here. Let me just try to take up just a couple more, and I'll connect a couple. Because these are Georgia specific, but they're also about our democracy. Alex in Washington says what happened in Georgia was disgrace to democracy and a call to action. Congresswoman, what, as a representative, what do you believe must be done to fight against these patterns of voter suppression that are affecting your state and the country at large? And let me also mention Wade in Florida is reminding us that there are 2 Senate seats this cycle. And of course, we want the great legislation you're working on to actually make it through Mitch McConnell's Senate, preferably no longer Mitch McConnell's Senate, instead of dying there. Emily, who's in Georgia, says, how can we work not only to help Lucy win again against Karen Handel, but to help other Democrats in the state as well? So I know I'm balling up about 3 different questions and lobbing them over at you, but from the mechanics of the election to what we've got to do to mobilize, what are the best things that we can all do to make sure that Georgia has a great outcome on Election Day?
Well, thank you so much. I mean, what happened here in Georgia on Tuesday is just catastrophic. And I could see it happening. I could see it coming, and I was preparing myself for it. My district office had been getting many calls from a number of my constituents who were asking, where is my vote by mail ballot? Where is it? We had here in Georgia what was considered no excuses early voting, but yet and still there have been many excuses for the just outright voter suppression again that we are suffering by. If I talked to most of my colleagues and I'd say, what do you have to do in your state to vote early? Simply all they had to do is just apply, and they were sent a ballot. Well, here in the state of Georgia, you had to register first. And then those ballots, if you were approved, those ballots came from Arizona. Now, why would they need to be manufactured and produced in Arizona and coming from Arizona for people to actually receive that ballot? Then they have to actually turn it in. So we were jumping through hoops first and foremost. But what happened here with our primary election was catastrophic. There were voters who showed up, when the polls opened, and machines weren't even up and running yet. Voters waited for hours and hours in line just to cast their votes in the rain. And the last people that they didn't even get to vote yesterday in Georgia until after midnight. Voter suppression in Georgia has a very long and ugly history. It always has been. And even though we're supposed to be the bastion of the civil rights movement, voter suppression and that kind of racism and bigotry is still alive and well. What I do know that even within my own district, the northern part of my district, which is very wealthy and more white, no problems. Everyone was able to get their ballot and they cast them. But it was in the specific part of my district and also within Fulton County that suffered the most extreme oppression ever, because those were the voting locations where the machines weren't working and they didn't have cords for the machines, or the machines weren't even installed till after the polling stations were open. And so we've had a very long and ugly history of voter suppression. And actually my opponent, Karen Handel, is one of the primary architects of voter suppression here in Georgia. Karen was Georgia's Secretary of State before she ran for the 6th Congressional District, and she's also run for Senate. But she was notorious for actually purging thousands of voters from the voter rolls. And I will tell you that Stacey Abrams with the Fair Fight here in Georgia has done phenomenal work. Her organization's done phenomenal work to mitigate a lot of what we were already beginning to see would happen again. The Democratic Party of Georgia had used a lot of resources, financial resources, to make sure that we had volunteers in place, and also the DCCC was spending a lot of time and effort here. But because of COVID-19, of course, a lot of those systems still became fractured. A lot of the resources that we had put in place, a lot of volunteers, with COVID-19, of course, some of that began to fall apart. So we've tried our best to really sustain people's ability to be able to vote. But we still have had many problems. But what I have said, I had the chance to talk to Secretary Clinton the other day, and I said, please, I need your help. I need you to tweet loudly. I need you to Facebook. I need you to let everyone know what's happening here in Georgia. We have to let everyone know that voter suppression is alive and well. And I need people outside of Georgia to call Georgia out, to call Governor Kemp out. We know that what they're doing is violating the Voting Rights Act. And by the Department of Justice, we know this very candidly, this is happening. So what I would ask is that people just really use social media, use your voice, tweet about it, email Governor Kemp, talk about it, and just demand that democracy work here the way it's supposed to. We know what happened with Stacey Abrams. I can guarantee you the same thing that they tried to do to Stacey, they are now trying to do to me and all of the candidates that are running up and down the ballot.
That's right. Well, I know that you're doing so much. You've got a very busy schedule. I'm glad we're able to have this conversation. If you're watching, I think you know why I'm such a fan of Lucy McBath and why we've got to do everything we can to make sure that her courage and her compassion and her capability and competence return to Washington. Think about it. The very same district that sent Newt Gingrich to Washington is now represented by a leader of the caliber of Lucy McBath. That's an extraordinary thing that we have a duty to make sure continues. So you know what to do, folks. Make sure that you are following and amplifying her on social media. If you can, send money to her campaign so she can compete. Visit her website and see about ways to volunteer, which is a whole different kind of flavor of volunteering now that we're in the digital age, but all the more freedom to do it from anywhere in the country. It will be a good day when we are celebrating Congresswoman McBath's victory and return to Washington. And everybody on this call, above all, tell a friend to also do all those things we just mentioned to help her return. Thank you for your leadership. Thank you for being with us. And please keep at it. We're so glad that you were there in Washington fighting for what's right.
Thank you, Mayor Pete. I appreciate you all. Please go to www.lucyforcongress.com. That's FOR. We need to raise between $7 and $8 million to be able to defend this seat and hold on to the House. And thank you so much.
Thank you.